Towards the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, during the first invasion of Soul Society, several Sternritter really stood out from the rest and were showcased more heavily by Kubo than others. One of these was definitely Asnot, in my opinion, the Sternritter who made an impression at the beginning of the series, but also, I would argue, one of the early standouts and one of the original most popular members of the Vandenreich was Sternritter E the Explode, Bambietta Basterbine. Now, Bambietta was the first female member of the Sternritter we actually saw. We had no idea about the rest of the Bambies until just before the second invasion, which is actually kind of weird thinking about it, how long we actually spent just knowing about the original set of Sternritters from the first invasion, but Bambietta really stood out to many people and definitely made an impression and became one of the early most popular members of the group. She was also one of the Sternritters to steal a Bankai. She stole Komamura's Kokujo Tengen Myo, which would eventually lead to them having a fated second round when the second invasion came about. In today's video, we're doing another character analysis. Bambietta came second in the previous character poll, the one before the last one, losing out to Komamura, but we've done Komamura's video now, and I promised that Bambietta would follow as the results were quite close. So today we are looking at one of the Sternritter, Sternritter E, and I hope you enjoy the video. Before it begins, however, guys, if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure to just hit that button now. Keep pushing those numbers up. We're close-ish to 40,000 subs, and that would be absolutely insane to reach before the end of the year. I would super appreciate it. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up as well. You guys are so brilliant at showing your support, and I do appreciate it so much, and it really, really does help with the YouTube algorithm. And also, hit the notification bell as well to stay up to date with all of my videos, because I put stuff out like this every single week. So I'm excited to dive into talking about Bambietta Basterbine on the eve of the PS5's release, at least here in the UK anyway. We've had to wait ages, it feels like, but I'm very excited for that. But I'm also very excited to talk about Bambietta, so I'm just in general a fantastic mood. Bambietta Basterbine, that is a pretty fantastic name. I remember reading it for the first time and just thinking how great it sounded with that quadruple B sound going through it, and apparently the name came about because Kubo really wanted a character whose name could be abbreviated or nicknamed as Bambina. And it's kind of ironic that Bambietta Basterbine is never called Bambina. Despite that, she's only ever referred to as Bambi. Now, as one of the original members of the Sternritter, she actually has a decent manga lifespan, and as with all these character analysis videos, we really only will be covering the canon manga in terms of her appearances and her impact on the story. Her first appearance is chapter 490, a mere 10 chapters into the final arc, when you can see her walking behind Hashwolf as the Sternritters gather at the Gate of the Sun. Her final appearance is all the way down at 604, and this is just after the Sternritters have been hit by the Ausvalen. I think they've pronounced that correctly, Ausvalen, compared to the last time I was talking about it. But Bambietta is dead anyway because Giselle has killed her for a second time at this point. So she does have a decently long manga lifespan, but she's actually not in it that much. She only shows up periodically at best. And Bambietta's a fairly interesting character. Now, if you want my honest opinion on this character, I was never a huge fan when she first showed up. And the reason for that was I loved the Vandenreich's early impression of being this cold, cruel, militaristic invading force, and then to see this little girl there with a heart belt buckle, I was kind of like, this is a bit weird. Tonally, seems a bit all over the place, and I felt the exact same about Mask de Masculine. The 6th Division was going up against this terrifying gothic opponent in Asnot, and then all of a sudden this luchador arrives, and I was like, we are all over the place right now. So for me, Bambietta was not as bad as Mask, but I did kind of view her as being a little bit out of place. However, her personality is incredibly sadistic and cruel, and to that sense she does fit with the Sternritters. I will say there's not too much to go into regarding her personality, and we find out nothing about her backstory either, as is the curse of most of the Sternritters, unfortunately. But she does have some interesting moments and some very unique relationships, shall we say, especially towards the end of her manga lifespan. So now let's look at her role in the story. Along with other members of the Sternritter, she arrives at the Gate of the Sun at the command of Yuha Bark to invade the Soul Society now that Ichigo is trapped in Hueco Mundo. Bambietta goes to the 7th Division where she faces off against Seijin Komamura and the rest of his squad. Initially, she doesn't seem to struggle at all, using her blade to cut down regular Shinigami, even carving through their own Zanpakuto, and then she fights Komamura where she manages to steal his Bankai when all of the captains collectively mess up. at which point Kokujo Tengen Mio becomes hers. And it's a shame we never get to see her use it. In fact, Kangdu and Asnot are the only two out of the four that we actually get to see use the Bankai. And obviously Driscoll Bursey uses Koko Gonryu Rikyu a little bit later as well. But in terms of the four that steal it in the moment, we don't get to see her use it, unfortunately. But she does well against apparently the entire of Squad 7, because she manages to defeat most of them to the point where she believes them to all be nearly dead. However, Komamura manages to rally them to their feet again as they are invigorated by Yamamoto's presence on the battlefield, which seems to confuse Bambietta, but she doesn't appear again for the rest of the first invasion. Now, one thing I really want to point out about Bambietta before we move on to the next part of her story is just how much her character changes between the first invasion and the second. It seems like Kubo had an almost total rewrite in his head as to what to do with this character. In the first invasion, I thought at least she was supposed to be like a really young girl, like almost a child. She has a sword, which you never see again. She's wearing like these black stockings, which you never see again. And just overall, her personality doesn't feel quite the same as it does later on. The next time we see her is during the Sternritter meeting when Uryu is named the heir. She reacts pretty badly to this, like most of them do. And then the next time we see her, I was really thrown off. Bear in mind, I was thinking at this point that Bambietta was a little girl, like a kid. Remember, Komamura also calls her that in the first invasion. She says, oh, you know, I'm surprised the Soul Society is using a little doggy as a captain. You must be hurting for soldiers. And Komamura's like, I can't believe the enemy army is using a little girl. So I was like, Bambietta's a kid. The next time we see her, she's like seducing some Vandenreich soldier to come into her personal chambers and have sex with him, apparently. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? This is not the direction I was expecting this character to go in all of a sudden. And apparently she's not a little kid at all, and I kind of thought Kubo was going to go for like some Black Widow theme with her after that point, where, you know, she would like entice men in and then kill them, because she does kill this dude, but it's never really brought up again. It's just apparently a thing she does. It sounds like a thing most of the Bambies do, because Candice kind of has a go at her for it. But anyway, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. This bit did throw me in the manga there when I read it for the first time. And I remember seeing on the forums on Bleach Asylum, my sentiments were shared. Our initial impressions of Bambietta from the first invasion were apparently completely off. She wasn't a little kid at all. And it was interesting. I think Kubo, personally, I think she was originally supposed to be a little kid. And then Kubo changed his mind and was like, I'm going to take this character in a slightly different direction. Her sword, again, like I said, is never seen again, which is a bit weird as well. And she undergoes an ever so slight design change, but it's nothing too major. So after she kills this poor guy who was really just thinking he was getting lucky, the other Bambies finally arrive. And this is the first time we see them: Candice, Meninas, Lil Toto, and Giselle. And they all arrive to kind of chastise Bambietta for her behaviour. And Bambietta talks to them about how she is concerned for the future of the Vandenreich. And now you have to assume this is because Yhwach is appointing Uryu as the new heir, but it's never gone into any further. And again, that's a big shame, because I think Bambietta's concern about the army and the empire and the direction it's going in would have been really interesting. Now, these two Vandenreich-focused chapters really are just supposed to be showcasing the dissent among the Sternritters, about how they're all very unhappy with the fact that His Majesty has appointed this outsider as his heir. But unfortunately, it doesn't really go anywhere for any of them, apart from Hashwolf. Hashwolf's about the only character who continues this plot thread. But the rest of them, it just kind of does sort of get dropped, which is a bit of a shame, actually. I don't really know what Kubo was trying to do here. Like I said, it would have been really interesting, I think, for Bambietta's character had she continued to be concerned about the Vandenreich's future. You know, just to show that she has some stake in the Empire. I think that would have been really interesting. What's also weird is this is the first and only real time we see her interact with the Bambies as a group. Obviously, they do all show up a bit later on when she's about to be killed. But this is the only time they really all talk as a team. And considering they're supposed to be a group of friends, you would assume, at least loosely called them that, and Bambietta is their self-proclaimed leader, it's really weird that they don't have more time on screen together. But what we do get here, like I said, is nice, and it gives us the briefest of flashes into all of their personalities. The next time we see Bambietta, the Vandenreich has fully invaded the Seirete for the big climactic battle, and the rest of the Bambies have apparently completely abandoned her. And at this point as well, she's also lost the Bankai that she stole initially. All the stuff with Kangdu and BG9 has just taken place. And Bambietta is like, you know, why are you guys freaking out? The Bankai never belonged to us in the first place. And I actually appreciate that kind of cool-headedness from her, where Kang and BG9 did disappoint me in the way they did seem to freak out when they lost their Bankai and were initially just immediately defeated. Bambietta does take a better approach to this, and she just uses like her explode to just destroy Shinigami around her and levels the entire area out of rage at the fact she's been abandoned, to kind of bring some captains out into the open, and Komamura does arrive. What follows is one of the most embarrassing defeats of a captain ever, and then one of my favourite battles in this arc. So Komamura arrives to take on Bambietta, but he's not alone. Shinji Hirako arrives as well. And I was initially like, yes, this is really cool. We're going to get a great scene. And Shinji uses Sakanade for the only time on screen, I believe, in this arc. He uses it to protect Omaida later on, but it's off-screened. So he uses Sakanade against Bambietta, and Bambietta does get thrown off by it, but she reveals one of the major weaknesses of Sakanade, which is, you know, as long as you don't care about anyone or anything around you, you can just blow everything up and it won't matter, that your senses are all a bit muddled. So Bambietta immediately defeats Shinji once she activates her holy form. The holy form scene is pretty cool. Her Volstendig is pretty cool, but again, it's not that great. Looks-wise, in my opinion, it's very, very simple. It's just a Heilig Schlein and basically some wings. Now, the wings are fairly cool. I like that they're slightly unique. They're very jagged at the bottom, and they seem to actually house her bombs in them, which again, I really like, and then she uses that to one-shot Shinji and take him out of the game. It's at this point we find out that she is Sternritter E the Explode, and as far as her shrift goes, it's okay, I don't mind it. It's not particularly creative, I don't think. She basically just blows things up, but I actually do like the fact that she isn't firing bombs, she's firing reishi, and when that reishi goes into something, it turns it into a bomb, and I like that, because if she was just flinging bombs, it wouldn't be that creative. But the fact that she can do that, that she can inject her own reishi into something and to make it explosive, does again show that she is a Quincy, and that it really does kind of showcase her skills with reishi and her dominion over that. We then get her fight with Komamura, which I'll go into a little bit later on, but suffice to say, is one of my favourite fights in this arc. Komamura does admittedly absolutely destroy her, but it's a really cool thematic fight nonetheless, which results in her basically taking her own bomb, going flying downwards and just being completely wiped out of the fight. She's not actually dead, however, but she does appear that she can't move. There's some kind of paralysis, perhaps, or she's just winded for now. But Giselle takes this moment basically to kill her, which I think is pretty dark. The whole thing is pretty dark. The whole scene is dark. The weird thing about this is the rest of the Bambies don't seem to care at all that Bambietta is about to get killed. And turned into essentially a zombie slave. Bambietta does not want this to happen. She's freaking out about it, but Giselle does it anyway. And it is dodgy, because you kind of feel like they're all watching their backs a little bit. The moment one of them goes down, Giselle is going to turn them into a slave. It is weird. It is a weird scene. The weirdest part for me is that none of the other Bambies actually care. They all just sort of stand over her. Giselle makes some comment about how, oh, it wouldn't be right to carry on without you, or something like that. And they let her do her thing. And it is a bit weird. There's not really, I'm assuming there's not really any camaraderie really between them. That if there's any friendship there, it's mostly surface level. But from this point on in the story, Bambietta is never the same again. And I know that many of her fans out there absolutely despise what happens to this character moving forward in the series. And really, Bambietta, as we see her prior to this moment, is not really in the story very much. I've just gone through everything she does, and it's really very little. And from this point on, she is now one of Giselle's zombies, essentially a servant constantly craving Giselle's blood to keep herself going, keep herself moving, and reanimated. And later, when Giselle ends up fighting Mayuri Kurotsuchi, she calls on Bambietta's corpse, and Bambietta arrives to fight him. And from this point on, Bambietta does feel incredibly nerfed to me, both as a character and also in terms of her raw strength and abilities. She does feel considerably weaker. She tries to take on Mayuri, and Mayuri, as he does, has ways around Bambi's bombs, and Bambi gets utterly destroyed in this fight. Like, Giselle uses her as a meat shield, essentially, to take loads of damage, and the sheer amount of disrespect that falls on Bambietta here is weird. It is weird. It makes me feel like Kubo hated this character. Like I said, I have no real allegiance to Bambietta. What happened to her I'm not too fussed about it. It's a character I'm not particularly interested in that regard, but it is tough to watch, and you know that fans of Bambietta are absolutely hating what's happening here. Giselle and her, like I said, the relationship is something we'll cover a bit later on towards the end of this video, but it is unlike anything we've ever seen before in Bleach, the way she controls her like this, but she abuses her, she beats her, and the way I see it, I kind of assumed, at first I thought it was just supposed to be like this horrible abusive relationship where Giselle is completely in control. Now I think about it, my assumption is it's supposed to mirror the way Mayuri used to treat Nemu, because obviously that's who they're fighting at the moment. Mayuri and Nemu have evolved way beyond that relationship for the most part. Mayuri has mellowed out, and Giselle says something along the lines of, I wouldn't know, I'm not a sadist, like implying Mayuri is a sadist and she isn't, but really she is a sadist, and she is very reflective of how Mayuri was back in the Soul Society arc. And this sounds like it's turning more into a Giselle character analysis, but she is an important character for Bambietta. And so Bambietta was just getting absolutely beaten around by Giselle, completely bent to her will. And it's disturbing. It's weird stuff. It's stuff that I never expected to see in Bleach. I remember reading it and I was like, okay, this is kind of strange. But I think it is supposed to reflect the Mayuri-Nemu relationship of old. But either way, Bambietta is just wrecked in this fight. Giselle kind of periodically heals her. She reattaches her arm at one point. But then Charlotte Coolhorn and the rest of the Arancars arrive, and Bambietta just gets ruined. Somehow Coolhorn just grabs her face and flings her into a building, and then she comes flying back and he just annihilates her with his heart-shaped Cero. And it's disappointing. It's weird to think that Bambietta is brought back only to be annihilated by characters who you would assume to be considerably weaker than her. So that much is really strange about the direction Kubo takes this character in. And she really doesn't do anything after this either. She gets kind of wrecked, and then you don't see her again until towards the end of her manga lifespan. And yeah, the very final time we see her is after Giselle has been defeated by Mayuri, and they've retreated essentially to a piece of rubble, and Giselle is now trying to take back the blood that she gave to Bambietta to revitalize herself, you would assume. Bambietta's like, no, don't take it, I need it to live, at which point Giselle freaks out and just smashes her head against this rock, and Bambietta is dead for good, at least in the manga. I believe she does, well, I know she appears in Can't Fear Her Own World, so she's not dead, but she is dead. She's in this state of suspended death, apparently, which is pretty rough. It's not a great fate for this character, and Kubo just apparently wanted to give Giselle a serious punching bag. The last time you see Bambietta in the manga, Giselle is smashing her head against this rock, turning it into pulp, essentially, and then freaking out about her and saying how much she loves her. So it is a weird relationship. So that's it for all Bambietta does in the manga itself, but onto her fights then. And like I said, the second invasion is home to one of my favourite fights in the arc, which is Bambietta versus Komamura. And Komamura is obviously human Komamura at this point. It's a great twist, and it makes for a really effective fight. Bambietta's motive for doing what she does and for following Yhwach is never explicitly stated. However, you do get a nice bit of insight into her character and the inner workings of her head in this fight when she says to Komamura, when she discovers that he has staked his life on this fight, she says something along the lines of, people, you only fight to win, and if you don't win, you die. So if you've already given up your life, there's no point in fighting. So Bambietta is, at least on some level, doing what she does to survive. She's fighting essentially for survival. And actually, when you consider what happens with Giselle, that kind of makes sense. It gets put into context a little bit. Bambietta has this fear of losing in battle and dying, and she does lose, and she is killed, but obviously not by Komamura. So I find that pretty interesting, but I just love the fight as a whole. I mostly love it because of how cool Komamura is, to be fair. Human Komamura and Bankai Joe are just really awesome together, and it makes for a great fight. And I think the finale of that battle is fantastic as well, when Komamura just swings his Bankai sword and it hits Bambietta. It basically hits Bambietta's reishi, pushes it back into herself, and as she's like falling backwards, it detonates. It's a great finale to a great fight. And I just love it. I think it's I cannot wait to see that fight animated. I think it's going to be really emotional and just hopefully done really, really well. But Bambietta herself is not given a great amount of time to shine in it because it is just used to demolish her for the most part. But it is cool. Like I said, she wipes out Shinji no problem at all. She has a very brief little skirmish with Hinamori, which again shows her kind of sadistic, psychotic side briefly, which is cool again. But for the most part, she doesn't really do too much outside of that in that fight, other than get absolutely wasted. Before we move on to talk about her second fight, I mentioned earlier that I felt Bambietta, or Zombietta as she's affectionately known by some fans in this state, had become seriously nerfed in terms of her strength in this form, and I believe that still holds true. However, that's only really when Mayuri and the Orankars get involved, because actually Bambietta is involved in a very, very short skirmish against Ikkaku and Yumichika just before this fight begins. She arrives at Giselle's beck and call to help her fight the two Shinigami. And this is so barely a fight that shouldn't even really register as one. It is more a little skirmish that lasts for not even a chapter. But it's interesting because Bambietta seems more in control in this fight, and she actually does a decent job at fending off these two sort of captain level, vice captain level Shinigami. Now, it's possible that the reason Bambietta does so well in this fight is because Ikkaku and Yumichika have absolutely no idea what they are up against, and she uses her bombs effectively, but it's more the fact that she can't die that really throws them off. Ikkaku even stabs her through the head with Hozuki Maru, and she survives, which obviously really does confuse him, and I think that's the main reason she looks to perform better in this fight than maybe she actually does. Because, like I said, Ikkaku still manages to stab her in the head, and then Yumichika takes off her arm. It's a nice bit of choreography, actually, that small little scuffle, but Bambietta does come out on top, just detonating a bomb right in front of them both and almost taking them out of the fight completely. But it is that element of surprise that Bambietta has over them that I think really helps her in this part of the fight. I will say I really like how Kubo put that extra bit of detail into Bambietta to show the follow-through on some of her attacks. And what I mean by that is there's an instance here where she grabs the side of Ikkaku's head and begins to use a bomb. However, Yumichika cuts her arm off. But you see in the image her arm is falling away and it still has the bomb in the hand, and then you see it hit the floor and detonate. And something similar happens later on as well. When she defeats Shinji, she detonates something inside of him and he goes flying, but there are two more bombs flying with him, and then Kubo makes a point of showing them blow up later as well. So I find that to be kind of interesting, but it does also call into question how exactly her powers work. Because I was under the impression that Bambietta would, you know, consciously send a ball of reishi somewhere and then cause it to detonate, but the way it's showcased here shows that it does actually act more like a traditional bomb after all, where even though it falls out of her hand and her arm, you know, clearly is not attached to her anymore, it still goes off anyway. So it looks like the bombs will blow up regardless, almost like a typical explosive, but I found that interesting nonetheless. And what's also cool to talk about very briefly here as well is that Bambietta does get stabbed through the head here, another sign of Kubo taking a slightly more gruesome route with the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. But what's interesting, of course, is that Bambietta is a bit ironic that she fights and is defeated by an immortal Komamura, only to eventually become a more twisted version of that herself. So I did find that quite interesting, but almost straight after this, Mayuri arrives. Now, she is one of the few Sternritters to actually get 2 fights. She ends up then fighting Mayuri and Nemu, and then some of Mayuri's Arankars alongside Giselle. And I actually quite like this fight, the March of the Zombies. As far as I'm concerned, it's not as good as the Komamura fight, but it's a very different battle, and Bambietta plays a very different supporting role in this fight. Giselle is the main villain in this battle, and Bambietta is just one of her subordinates, alongside people like Hitsugaya. But it's weird, again, like, the way Bambietta is treated in this fight is just strange. Like, she's incredibly weak, for starters. She gets beaten around by just about everybody, including Charlotte Coolhorn. But Hitsugaya, now that he's a zombie, appears to be stronger than ever. Or at the very least more bloodthirsty. So that was kind of weird to me. I kind of wasn't sure. It felt to me like Kubo didn't really know what to do with Bambietta at this point in the story. He brought her back, and it's a nice bit of continuity. You know, it's cool that there was some follow-up to the whole Bambies arriving to where Bambietta has been defeated scene, and they actually did follow up on that, and it turns out that, yeah, Giselle has killed her and now made her into a zombie. I would assume the strength difference between her and Hitsugaya is down to the fact that Hitsugaya is not dead. He's just been zombified while he was alive and Bambi was actually killed. But even so, like, the difference in strength seems to be astronomical. Bambietta is now getting wrecked by Fraction characters, which is weird. And she just appears, I think she's just being used because obviously Giselle is not a physical fighter, and Kubo needed some flashy explosive attacks in this battle, but she's countered at every turn. So it's definitely not Bambietta's proudest moment. And I do think as a Bambietta fan, if you were a Bambietta fan, it's tough to see what happens to this character because she does get treated really harshly by Kubo from the point of her defeat against Komamura moving forwards. And then finally, if we just briefly look at her relationships, and again, she doesn't have an awful lot of screen time, so there isn't too much to go over here, but the first relationship I want to talk about is with the Bambies in general. She believes herself to be the leader of this little clique of Sternritter women, but they clearly don't respect her, I would say, in the slightest. You know, Lil Toto is definitely subverting her most of the time. She's more intelligent than Bambietta, more calm and cool-headed. Having said that, they clearly do respect her strength, I would say, and that's potentially what puts her above the rest of them. I think she's stronger than all of them. Not necessarily combined, but on an individual level, Bambietta, I would say, is the most powerful of all the female Sternritters, for sure. And when she activates her Volstendig, even Giselle is like, oh, you know, she shouldn't be doing that because she's so crazy, but she's so powerful that she could end this whole fight in an instant. Now, I'm sure there's some hyperbole there, but there's no denying that Bambietta has immense destructive potential, and the explode, when really unleashed, is kind of crazy. So it is a shame then that she spends so little time with the Bambies as a whole. They only speak, like I said, properly once, and that's before the second invasion, and then they seem to be absolutely fine, or at the very least they are not voicing their complaints about her being turned into a zombie for Giselle to essentially do whatever she wants with her. So it's a bit of a strange, kind of twisted relationship going on there, but that is the same with a lot of the Sternritters, and the Sternritters on a whole are just a weird bunch with some weird stuff going on. But her relationship with Giselle is definitely slightly more fleshed out and controversial, I would say, definitely among Bambietta fans for reasons you can clearly understand. So Giselle takes control of Bambietta, and Kubo really plays up the sort of sexual innuendo or the kind of implied sexual nature of a lot of stuff going on between these two characters, even though it's then subverted and revealed that none of it is actually like that. It's just you're supposed to think it is at first. It turns out that Giselle has complete control over Bambietta in this reanimated state because Bambietta needs blood, needs Giselle's blood in particular to survive and to keep going in this zombified state. And Giselle holds this over her like just some complete power. It feels like a total power trip for this character, and it's a shame in a way that we don't get to delve into Giselle's own psyche more because she's clearly like completely mad. Like she loves Bambietta, but she also just beats her up and she kills her. But when Bambietta's corpse is just in front of her, she like freaks out over how beautiful and cute she is. And she's like hugging this dead body, and it's like there is some crazy stuff going on here. I don't know what Kubo was like going for necessarily, but he takes Giselle especially to another level in terms of Bleach weirdness. But But Bambietta, yeah, she's basically a puppet of Giselle's at this point, and it's interesting that Giselle doesn't seem to distinguish from friend from foe in that sense. If you're one of her zombies, you're her slave. And she does seem to take particular enjoyment in the fact that she does control Bambietta completely, and that Bambietta relies on her at this point as well. Bambietta needs her, and Giselle seems to love that. So it's a really weird relationship that Kubo really plays up as being disturbing and abusive and just weird in general. But it's kind of funny as well to me that Bambietta gets beaten around, but Hitsugaya, you know, Giselle dresses him up nicely, makes him look like a badass, and it's like Bambietta, she just lets her get wrecked completely. So again, it's weird. There's weird stuff going on in that relationship for sure. It's unlike anything we've ever really seen in Bleach. The closest comparison is Mayuri and Nemu, I would say, to that sense, of a subordinate who only wants to please their master, but their master is just beating them up at every chance they get, being horrible to them, verbally abusive, just physically abusive. I think that's what it's supposed to reflect, but maybe to another extreme even, I don't know. And unfortunately, that's really it for the sort of sad story of Bambietta Basterbine. She doesn't do anything else in the canon manga apart from that, and then eventually just gets killed by Giselle. So that's it for this character. It is a bit of a dour ending, I feel, because she does have such a sad fate, but before the whole zombification thing, she is undeniably incredibly powerful, very, very strong, with a fearsome shrift that I put her at about 12th, I think, on my top Sternritters list in terms of strength. I think she was very, very powerful when unleashed. She's almost like a mad dog in that sense. I think that's kind of the point. You know, she has no rules and boundaries when it comes to fighting, and she just blows everything up. And I think it's a pretty powerful statement. I think she is a strong character who gets, shall we say, very, very unlucky with her opponents. Seijin is obviously immortal during his fight with her, and Kubo uses her explosions to showcase this to great effect. And Bambi is just utterly helpless to do anything against him. And that's it for Sternritter E Bambietta Basterbine The Explode. What did you think of this character? Were you a Bambietta fan? Did you not really care what happened to her either way? And even if you didn't care, what did you think of the relationship between her and Giselle? Like I said, I thought it was pretty unique for Bleach, even if it was uniquely dark and even a little bit disturbing at times. I still think Bambietta was a fairly interesting character, even if much of her potential was probably not met by Kubo. Despite her being one of the major Sternritters at the start of the arc, she did sort of fall off in relevance after her battle with Komamura, much like many of the other early Sternritters did as well. So that's it, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this character. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. And until next time, I'll catch you later. See you then.